call to order. So we'll start with the roll call for attendance. Director Banfield.
Present.
Director Barrows.
Here.
Director Decker. I don't see her in the participants list yet, but I'm sure she'll be joining us shortly. Director Sproul.
Here.
All right. I do have just a couple small modifications to the agenda, additions to the agenda that just didn't get added to the posted agenda. One, before we begin, Director Sproul had requested an opportunity to talk about the WASDA conference that she attended. And I know Director Banfield attended as well, so she would like to join in. We're going to add that at the very end of our agenda under the reports section. And then I have a quick question for the superintendent before we begin the agenda. The briefing that was sent to the board yesterday for the kindergarten, the K-pods, that information also included, or that presentation also included slides on the D and F rates. Were we intending to talk about that tonight?
Yes, just as a way of introducing the at-risk pod planning that is currently underway.
Okay, then I thank you. Then that'll be encapsulated in that topic. All right, then we'll go ahead and start with the first item on our agenda, which is the reports from our student representatives. And the first report is going to be from Riley Sharman and Maya Anson from Columbia River.
Okay. Good evening, Dr. Webb, members of the board, members, and community guests. My name is Maya Anson, and I'm accompanied by Riley Sharman, and we are from Columbia River High School. This month, our prompt to student board representatives was to give an example of some essential skills all students should have before they graduate, and to explain if we do or do not feel that our school adequately teaches us these skills. Beginning with critical thinking, this is important because it helps one understand the world and themselves effectively and efficiently. In the real world, critical thinking is necessary in situations where a decision needs to be made, whether that be big or small. Next, we believe time management to be a very essential skill when preparing to graduate and go out into the world. It is so valuable to be able to find a time where everything that needs to be done can be done, but to also find time to relax and do things that we enjoy. Thirdly, oral communication. We discussed and found oral communication to be of extreme value, especially in our generation, as we're living in a very digital age, and oral communication can often be overlooked and under-practiced. Learning to communicate with those around you effectively is so important, especially with those in positions such as employers, coworkers, professors, and so on. Lastly, we have the most important group of skills under the umbrella term of real-life skills, which we will now focus on in the most detail. Real-life skills include things such as economic knowledge, caring for children, leading a healthy lifestyle, effective planning things, cooperating, communicating, so on and so forth.
Columbia River provides many different opportunities suited for different interests and needs of students that will also teach them the skills they will need that we have touched on. Our IB program, Running Start program, and different variations of part-time honor classes are able to help students plan accordingly to their future goals while being able to critically think when given challenging lessons. Columbia River also offers life skills like financial algebra, marketing, child development, food and fitness, ASB, and more classes. These classes promote and teach day-to-day skills for students. In financial algebra, students learn the real-life mathematical skills adults use in their day-to-day life. This includes things such as taxes, loans, revenue, profit, interest, and so on. Secondly, marketing is a great class to learn business tactics, develop critical thinking, and problem solving, since most of their work is based on improv. Thirdly, our child development class allows students to have a better understanding on how to raise and care for children. Our last example of classes that teach us real-life skills in our student government class, which Maya and I are both very engaged in. This class has taught us the fundamentals of communication and planning through contacting student, admin, business, and sponsors. Columbia River reinforces these essential skills to help students understand the world and themselves efficiently. These skills are a necessity before graduation. That way, students can graduate high school with a better understanding for their future. We sincerely appreciate your attention this evening. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Riley and Maya. Our next presenter is Mahala Smith from Fort Vancouver.
Good evening, Dr. Webb, members of the board, cabinet members, and community guests. My name is Michaela Smith, and I'm from Fort Vancouver High School. I'm sure all of you have heard students or even your own kids ask, why are we learning this? I won't use linear equations in the real world. And while that is subjective, Fort makes sure that our students are ready for their next steps outside of high school, no matter what or where they may be. I asked a classroom of students, what do you think an essential skill for life is? And I received creative responses such as critical thinking and time management, but I was overwhelmed by the number of responses saying things such as paying bills and doing taxes. Luckily, we have programs that do just that. An elective class called Real Life 101 teaches students about financial responsibilities, mortgages, insurance, and more. However, because it is an elective, not as many people get to take it. So we have many other programs such as AVID, which focuses on becoming a more engaged and aware student. And the tutorials give students a way to learn these things who might not have those resources at home. There's even other sorts of lessons such as teamwork and communications that students need to build for life outside and beyond high school. Our vision statement at Fort is that our graduates are globally aware and engaged citizens who are college, career, and life ready. And that is what Fort embeds in every lesson, motto, and classroom. Personally, school has taught me a lot about myself and the world. And I think most students can agree that our biggest problem is procrastination. And at Fort, the balance of flexibility on deadlines, clear expectations, allows students to succeed while still creating healthy and responsible habits. Overall, I do believe that Fort prepares its students with important skills and aids in the building of character and personal success. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Michaela. Our next presenter is from Hudson's Bay, Karen Gallegos.
Good afternoon, Dr. Webb, members of the board, cabinet members, and community guests. My name is Karen Gallegos, and I am from Hudson's Bay. The prompt for this month was giving examples of some essential skills that all students should have before they graduate, and does your school adequately teach these skills? I had talked to some teachers and staffs, and I want to start off by saying that Hudson's Bay is big on critical thinking. It's important to build critical thinking in your high school experience because you build stronger and better connections with people around you. Critical thinking is not just a form of facts or evidence, but being able to build good communication, being able to be a problem solver, being open-minded, but also being able to help others and become a team with people that you are willing to make the best in themselves and yourself. Critical thinking is also being able to become a better person, listening to information, and hearing perspectives and experiences from others. This builds skills, and these traits help a person become a better person and be able to see the bigger picture. Does your school teach these skills? I strongly believe that my school does teach these skills. At Hudson's Bay, and our foundation is deeply rooted in cultivating critical thinking. Like I previously said, critical thinking is not just facts or evidence, but it's being able to make yourself better and being able to build skills and traits with not yourself, but other people as well. We have academic work, but we do it in the Bayway. Bayway is our mission at Hudson's Bay, and it stands for community ownership, critical thinking, perseverance, and empathy. We strongly believe that when we carry ourselves to hold conversations, execute routines, and serve one another, can build to become a better person. And I strongly believe that critical thinking does have a huge part in not just your high school experience, but becoming a better person and people around you. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Our next presenter is Teddy Beaver from Skyview.
Okay. Good evening, Dr. Webb, members of the board, cabinet members, and community guests. You want to go one more over, please? Yeah, thank you. Okay. My name is Teddy Beaver, and I'm from Skyview High School. High school is an extremely crucial time in all of our lives. Doors can be both opened and closed during these years. Being that these years are so important, it's vital that our high schools do the best they can to equip its students with the best opportunities it can going forward. Our school must not only equip, but help grow essential skills within its students to help them thrive beyond the school building. One of the most essential skills for the future is critical thinking. At Skyview, opportunities we have for students to grow this skill are AP and honor courses in the SMT Magnet program. All of these challenge students to think critically about the subject in their class and go beyond the basics of learning. Team and social skills are also extremely important. In a world that's going more and more digital with less than natural practice interacting with each other, the ability to work in a team and communicate with people successfully are as important as ever. At Skyview, teachers are encouraged to assign work involving a group effort. We also have sports, clubs, and other social events that are key times for students to grow these skills while interacting with their peers. Skills for the future are also essential for students. The SMT Magnet program, as spoken about before, at Skyview provides students with the opportunity to learn skills in areas of science, math, and technology that can all be applied in professions later in life. Career counseling is also provided at Skyview, where students are able to receive advice and guidance for their years after high school. The ability to self-manage finally is also very important in being successful after high school. AVID is a class at Skyview that helps students by providing advice on study habits, test taking, and other skills needed to be successful in the classroom and succeed throughout life. Skyview is a place willing and able to provide students with essential skills they may need to be successful in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Teddy. Our next presenter is Samantha Duncan from VSAA.
Good afternoon or evening, Dr. Webb, members of the board, cabinet members, and community guests. My name is Sammy Duncan, and I am here from VSAA. To best understand the student body for this prompt, I sent out a Google form to all VSAA students, asking them their thoughts on skills that they would like to learn and how VSAA teaches those skills. Some essential skills that students shared were time management, group work and cooperation, and life skills, such as paying taxes and voting. Students feel that these skills are essential to learn before graduating high school. One major way that VSAA teaches and endorses group work and time management is CORE, our 7th period class that all grades take. CORE is the root of VSAA, where the 6 art forms alternate years and themes, as we like to call it, where we focus on artists around the world using their different art and trying new things. In CORE, we have projects that go as our annual themes. And for example, this year's theme is Artist's Journey and focuses on all the art forms. For CORE projects, students in their classes work together to create an art piece and a presentation to present to their peers, usually at the end of a semester. This helps students develop confidence and presentation skills, but also work skills and time management by working together to complete their piece in time. Some ways that students feel that VSAA can improve is teaching more life skills. VSAA students want to learn to pay bills and taxes, apply for a job in college, register to vote, and build a resume. A larger focus on these skills would be highly beneficial for the students of VSAA, so that they are not only academically prepared for college, but prepared for tasks in life as an everyday adult. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Our next presenter is Kiara Navarro from iTech.
Hello. Good evening, Dr. Webb, members of the board, cabinet members, and community guests. My name is Kiara Navarro, and I am from iTech Preparatory. So iTech is well known for working with others and good at solving problems. Many of the essential skills that we have at iTech is collaboration, which allows teamwork and communication, as well as time management and solving real-world problems. Time management is such a big thing at our school as we juggle with our life, our schoolwork, and college classes as we have running start in our school. Solving real-world problems is something that we do a lot. We have a project that happened last year that's called iPrize. It's something like Shark Tank, where you find real-world problems and you try to fix it and make something go from good to bad. You try to find an idea to make it at least to where it can work or get an idea. We did this project for over a few months, trying to research, trying to find real world problems that we wanted to fix that we thought that we could make it better. And that is such a good thing to show that we as students can work with real world problems out of this time. And so I really wanted to show that, as well as teamwork and communication. We do, as I was talking before, a lot of projects, which that brings teamwork and communication into our school on a daily basis, as we are such a project-based school. And does iTech have these skills? I believe so, yes, because as we have many projects, they collaborate, communicate, and we show a lot of teamwork on every single day, even if we're on Zoom with these circumstances. As we work together on Zoom, and with some of the projects, we get together on breakout rooms and we show together that we can collaborate and still do teamwork while we're on Zoom today. And our teachers as well teach us time management by having us turn in our assignments on time, making sure that we understand that there are time limits for each assignment, to make sure that we understand that there are limits for each assignment and you can't just turn them in whenever you need to. So that's a very good technique for in the future for when you have jobs and you have a deadline. So that's really good. So yes, I do believe iTech is really good for all of these essential skills, and we apply them on an every daily basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiara. And our final presentation is going to come from Flex Academy, Lucas Carter and Dominic Pennington.
Okay, there we go. Recording? All right. Good afternoon, Dr. Webb, members of the board, cabinet, and community guests. My name is Lucas Carter. I'm here representing Vancouver Flex Academy. When I first heard the prompt, a few ideas came to mind immediately. Skills like communicating with your colleagues or bosses, working efficiently in groups, and various academic skills such as reading or studying strategies. Immensely important skills for whatever a high school student intends to do after they graduate. As I thought about these skills, I realized that, for the most part, public schools do a good job of teaching and reinforcing them through their instruction, Vancouver Flex Academy included. So that led me to ask myself, what skills does Flex teach well? If you ever watch an online tutorial video about a topic like how to change a tire, how to cook an omelet, or how to write a monthly budget, you'll always find a few comments in common. Namely, I wish I learned this in high school. Skills like basic cooking and grocery shopping, vehicle maintenance and repair, money management, apartment hunting, and professional quality email writing are sometimes overlooked. At Flex, classes like food and fitness teach students how to write grocery lists to prepare for recipes they will then cook in class, while a student in Real Life 101 might be learning how to replace a tire in the parking lot. Last year, the entire Flex Academy campus took part in an event ran by the IQ Credit Union. Students chose a prospective job and built a budget around expected salaries. Students in CWP prepared for an event by finding an apartment in the area or near planned secondary education, as well as fitting transportation into their budget. We got to see what budget items were the most important, where we could cut down on spending, and how much we would be able to put into savings. Flex Academy also emphasizes environmental awareness, conservation, and sustainability. I have a quote from our principal here. At Flex, we take the environment seriously. We focus on the issues of our times related to the environment and how to sustain it for future generations. Through hands-on, real experiences, we can make a difference in our surrounding area through tree planting, water conservation, and food supply creation. And as he mentioned, Flex Academy has several projects in the works for when we return to our campus, including projects from our horticulture department, simulating reforestation by growing a stand of trees and giving them away as Christmas trees to those in need, and planting water filtering vegetation in the swale in our parking lot. Overall, I think that Flex excels in teaching through real hands-on experiences. We're looking forward to being able to return to our campus as soon as it would be safe to do so. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lucas. All right, we're going to move on to the next item in our agenda, which is citizen comments. Citizen comments is the time in our meeting where the board and administrative staff like to hear comments from the public. If you wish to address the board live during one of our remote meetings, you should email vpsboard.directors@vansd.org by noon the day of the meeting so that our staff can add your name to the list of speakers and provide additional instructions. Because most matters require fact-finding and review, the board is not able to respond to any public comments made at this time. Additionally, the state's Open Public Meetings Act restricts deliberation of topics that have not been placed on the publicly noticed agenda in advance. If follow-up action is necessary, the board will ask the superintendent to work with administrative staff to consider the information and respond accordingly. Speakers are asked to be respectful with their remarks. Personnel complaints and personal attacks are not permitted. The board asks that personnel complaints be submitted in writing. When it is your turn to speak, please state your name and address for the record. You will have 3 minutes to make your comments. If you hear a chime, please conclude your remarks. If you have additional materials you would like the board to review, please email them to vpsboard.directors@vansd.org. The board appreciates, listens, and cares about the broad range of perspectives in our community. We thank you for your comments. The first speaker we have tonight is Carrie Van Nostrand.
Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Van Nostrand and my address is 2907 East 24th Street here in Vancouver, 98661. And I greatly appreciate the opportunity to share with you tonight. I am a proud VPS educator, especially proud based on the tireless and creative efforts that my teachers and counselors and nurses and SLP colleagues have engaged in since the pandemic started. I am also proud to represent them as VEA president of our Education Association or union. Want to respectfully acknowledge that I think we would all agree the ideal mode of instruction would be on site and in person with students, but under pandemic circumstances, I also acknowledge that's not possible, not only based on the health and safety situation here in the community, but based on some limited capacity as well. But as I alluded to originally, the creative solutions that our educators have already undertaken to make some of the current circumstances work, requiring several hundred hours above and beyond what they're formally contracted to complete. I can't go without applauding the educators in our midst for making the most of current arrangements. But I also recognize that based on community circumstances and personal circumstances, in spite of our best efforts, not all students are able to engage and access, especially as ongoing remote is a part of our experience. So I share the concerns that the board articulated at a November meeting around equity and the means by which we might facilitate better student and family access as we move forward. But really want to acknowledge that an all hands on deck approach is what we would benefit from and have been missing, unfortunately, to help fill some of the gaps in access and engagement for students and for families. And there are two realms that I'd love to emphasize. One in particular is based on classified staff's current experience. I'm encouraged to hear that some of our staff that were originally in furloughed status have been resecured and providing their own creative contribution to student and family experience, but also recognize that there are a number of classified staff who remain in furloughed status or with reduced hours. And at a time when there are gaps in access to fill, would love to work collaboratively with the district around some creative solutions that better leverage the use of all staff in our system. Family communication and outreach, helping assemble non-tech-based materials. If internet access and technology are part of those barriers for students and families, are only a few examples of ways that our classified staff could be contributing at this time. And I want to respectfully acknowledge that the money to pay them is there. It's been there, and we certainly as certificated counterparts would greatly benefit from their collaboration and contribution. So thank you for your consideration in that regard. I also recognize this is true as the district continues to explore expanding on-site services to include special education, kindergarten, and pre-K students with categorical program staff and students who would benefit from those services being a part of long-term planning as well. But also would like to acknowledge that for our special educators who've been engaged in on-site learning since September, there are a number of vacancies in the paraeducator realm that remain unfilled. And with the struggle to balance on-site services, the unique needs of students, and serving students remotely as well, the workload is further exacerbated under those circumstances. And we've heard from our kindergarten colleagues already that the manageability in balancing on-site services and serving students with their own due diligence remotely as well has not proven as feasible as we were hoping, and would love to be able to leverage not only classified staff support, but making better use of some of our certificated staff as well, who have requested alternate assignments and are fully capable of providing remote assistance and instruction to students, but have been prompted to take leave instead because that creative solution has not been explored by the district. So with these two missed opportunities, I appreciate your consideration of what creative solutions we could collaborate around to better meet the needs of students and families, but in a way that also acknowledges and respects the staff that we have within our system. So thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Aliyah Erike. I apologize if I mispronounced that.
Good evening, Superintendent Webb, members of the board, and members of the public. My name is Aliyah Iraqi. My address is 16613 Northeast 26th Street, Vancouver, Washington, 98684. I am a kindergarten dual language teacher at Anderson Elementary School, as well as a VEA building representative. I am speaking tonight regarding in-person teaching services. First, I want to make it clear that our building administrative team has been supportive and encouraging, and this statement is in no way intended to reflect on their role in this. I am speaking on behalf of myself and, having gained their permission, on behalf of my kindergarten teammates as well. Initially, in-person schooling was intended to begin when case numbers were under 75 cases per 100,000 for 3 consecutive weeks. While I realize that the guidance has always allowed for in-person education for younger learners, I am not sure that the guidance envisioned our educators providing in-person services when numbers reached over 400 cases per 100,000. My question for Dr. Webb and the members of the board is, when do we say enough is enough? What is your threshold? This is a question that continues to be asked with no answers. Although Washington is still part of a shrinking number of states that has not yet lost an educator to COVID, this is not cause for celebration. That means we have been lucky enough not to become part of that group. Is the district banking on luck to keep us safe? It makes us seriously question the integrity of the district that our health is being gambled with. I understand that saying no is tough, especially in the face of pressure, but in times of uncertainty and stress, I would like to believe that my employer, Vancouver Public Schools, would stand up and be able to say no to the pressure to put on them to reopen schools before it is safe to do so. We feel like guinea pigs, undervalued, taken advantage of, and used to get results. It was referenced at a previous board meeting that kindergarten teachers are miracle workers. I assure you we are not. We are human beings with a love for our job and currently in a near impossible situation that puts us directly in harm's way for making us more susceptible to contracting the virus by an increased exposure to the public. We gladly give all of our time, energy, attention, and devotion to other people's families every single day, but now we are being asked to put other people's families before our own health and our own family. While we were given options to take leave, it translated into quality teachers essentially being forced out of their positions when the district chose to place its own agenda ahead of the safety and well-being of its employees. Not only does this reek of ableism, but besides using all their accrued sick and personal time, this does nothing to utilize their potential for the many students whose families had the option to keep them fully remote. This would have ensured that the students received more equitable time with a teacher solely dedicated to meeting their needs, and not a teacher that was spread so thinly between trying to manage 3 separate groups of students. An option was given to students to remain fully remote. The same option in some fashion should have been provided to teachers as well. We ask you to please reconsider the decision of in-person services with our current COVID data. Our lives matter just as much as our students' lives. We care about them and want them to succeed, but this should not come at a cost to the livelihoods and health of all individuals in the district. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Shelley Moody.
Good evening. My name is Shelley Moody. My address is 11606 Northwest 4th Court, 98685. I wanted to follow up on my public comment last month about the inequity of the kindergarten instructional plan that's currently in place. My husband and I met with district administrator 3 weeks ago to discuss this inequity. In the conversation, they listened to our concerns, but were very clear that they have no plans to modify the model. They made no commitment to address the discrimination against our child because he is medically unsafe to return to the building. At the last board meeting, several board members spoke about the need for the district to address the inequity of the plan. They are openly refusing to follow that directive and reevaluate the plan to address those kids who are fully remote. We were told to take our complaint and make a formal complaint to OSPI. I don't want to do that. I want to be a part of problem solving at a district level, creating a local solution that works for our staff and our kids in our buildings. I'm disappointed and disillusioned that I was dismissed in having that conversation because we have ideas that can be valuable. OSPI has quite a backlog, I'm sure you can imagine. And it's going to take a while to get a meeting with them to even start discussing a formal complaint. In the meantime, my child is not receiving an equitable education. His needs are not being met in a fashion that is comparable to his medically able peers who can return in person. Here's the thing. This is not a complex problem. The easiest solution is recall our highly trained and amazing staff from furloughs and leaves. We have furloughed paras who are specifically trained to teach small groups of students and have them provide instruction to these kiddos that are fully remote. Secondarily, we heard at last board meeting that there were 7 certificated kindergarten staff who had taken leaves due to their own personal concerns about returning to the classroom. I have no doubt, I've spoke with them, several of them, that they would continue to teach fully remote to address this gap in equity for these kids. The issue we heard last board meeting was moving kids around might create overloads. Has anyone actually talked to a kindergarten teacher about the overload they all have right now? Because every kinder teacher I've spoke with is sinking. It's too much put on them right now. My son's teacher candidly told me she can't address his needs. She doesn't have the time between in-person, group A, group B, and fully remote. It's too much. Saying it could create overloads is an excuse to not address this problem. That's for a lot of students across the district. I've spoke with other parents I know. There's 12 students in my son's school who are staying fully remote. Multiply that by 21, we're talking 150, 200, maybe more kids. That's a lot of students not getting equitable education when we have staff trained, currently employed by the district that can bridge this gap for our students and make it equitable and make them feel important. Because my son cries when he has to get off because he doesn't have enough time with his teacher. So please, in these hard times we have, come together to make a solution for our staff and our students to have equity, for everyone to get their needs met. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moody. Our next speaker is Melissa Bergman.
Hi, good evening. My name is Melissa Bergman. I live at 7210 Kansas Street, Vancouver, Washington, 98664. I want to thank you for having a public forum and holding space for us members of the community and for using an equity lens this school year. I'm a mother of a first grade child in VPS, and I'm also a 5th grade teacher in VPS. Over my 10 years of teaching, I've often had people call me and my colleagues superheroes. The thing about superheroes is that there is always someone supporting them in their many achievements. Batman needs his Robin. Teachers are no different. We need more support. We need our paras. We've been told we can do hard things. Yeah, we know. We did that before the pandemic and with para support. We need to provide our students an equitable distance learning experience. I hope the district can be creative in their ability to make sure that all students are receiving and equitable education, I feel like the district needs to be all hands on deck. We have teachers, I know one personally, who would love to have taught remotely and was not given the opportunity to do so and was forced to take a leave. We are in the midst of a pandemic and we are doing all we possibly can to make sure our students are supported, but we are drowning. We need your support. We need more help. We need all hands on deck. So school board, Dr. Webb, please, I encourage you to go back to the drawing board and find a solution where we can meet our students' needs, but also not putting more work onto teachers. I'm very lucky to have an amazing administration and they're doing all they can to support. But we have teachers out there, we have paras out there that we can use in order to make sure our students are getting what they need and to also support our parents. I've talked to many parents who are also drowning and need support. And we are doing all we can to support them. But we're a VPS family and we need to come together in order to find a solution that will support all students in receiving an equitable education. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Barb Flymate.
Good evening, members of the board and Superintendent Webb. My name is Barb Flymate. I live at 9701 Northwest 19th Avenue, Vancouver, Washington, 98665. I'm the president of the Vancouver Association of Educational Support Professionals. I'm speaking to you this evening to again assert that it is completely unacceptable that Vancouver Public Schools has chosen to furlough hundreds of paraeducators, clerks, and office professionals this fall. Teachers, parents, and concerned citizens from across Vancouver and Clark County cannot fathom the district's decision to cut support staff while hundreds of students are struggling to succeed in remote learning. In a time of so much uncertainty, one thing is abundantly clear: students need more help from trained and caring adults in VPS, not less. This need is especially urgent for students who are already at risk and falling through the cracks. Our high schools are experiencing more F grades for students than ever before, including some of our high schools where this is extremely uncommon, schools who are known for students graduating with high academic honors. Parents and students deserve more from VPS during this difficult time. 100% of Vancouver Public Schools support staff should be returned to work to ensure that the diverse needs of the district students and families are being met. In stark contrast to the path chosen by Vancouver Public Schools, many other districts across Washington state have instead opted to retain their classified support staff, and they are using these dedicated employees to make sure that all students are receiving equitable learning opportunities and support. Some specific examples of this include using support staff to assist with mentoring and connecting with struggling students, connecting parents with student and community resources, engaging and supporting students with low attendance and missing assignments, and delivering paper assignments to those struggling with the online learning. Parents and teachers in Vancouver and across Washington state agree that this, as the pandemic continues to spread and the cases of COVID-19 surge, it's harder than ever to support students virtually. Yet VPS has furloughed the support staff who could be working with these students right now. District cites decreased enrollment and its impact on funding to justify cutting the jobs of hundreds of our support staff. But an ample rainy day reserve fund balance is evidence that Vancouver Public Schools has the money to do more for students rather than to try to balance their budget on the backs of the lowest paid employees. This is the greatest public health emergency in more than a century. If this doesn't meet the district's threshold for spending a portion of their rainy day reserve, I'm not sure what does. Knowing that our students and families need more help right now, it's impossible to justify the district's plan to maintain their rainy day fund instead of doing all they can to provide equitable learning and opportunities and adequate support for all Vancouver students. I strongly urge you, the Vancouver School Board, to change course from this misguided approach and bring back all the district support staff to ensure every student has the individualized support of the caring educators in Vancouver Public Schools. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our speakers. All right, we're going to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the consent agenda. So can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move.
Thank you, Kathy. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ooh, tie. I'm gonna give it to Tracy. All right, so we'll go ahead and move to the vote. Director Banfield,
Move to approve.
Director Barrows,
Approve.
Director Decker,
Approve.
Director Sproul.
Approve.
I also vote to approve, so the motion passes. Which brings us to the first item of our regular business, which is a recommendation to approve award of RFP number 2020-078, the equity audit.
Five responses were received at the RFP opening on October 27, 2020 for the services to meet the requirements to conduct a district-wide equity audit of the organization's board's policies, district programs, curriculum and assessments, district instructional practices, district hiring and placement practices, school building resource allocations, and culture and climate. The fund source is the general fund. It's a recommendation that the board of directors approve award for the equity audit to the Valbrun Consulting Group along with UPD Consulting in the amount of $219,065 plus necessary travel exclusive of Washington State sales tax.
All right, do I have a motion to approve?
This is Kathy. I motion.
Thank you, Kathy. And a second?
I'll second.
Do it to Kamara this time. Hi, again. All right, any questions or discussion? Okay, not hearing any. We'll go ahead and move to the vote. Director Banfield,
Approve.
Director Barrows,
Approve.
Director Decker,
Approve.
Director Sproul,
Approve.
and I also vote to approve, so the motion passes. All right, our next item is recommendation to approve change order with Skanska USA Building for Mclaughlin Middle School.
On February 27, 2018, a contract was awarded to Skanska USA Building for the construction of the replacement Mclaughlin and Marshall schools. The Phase 2 gymnasium, locker rooms, dance fitness spaces at Mclaughlin project schedule must be extended 38 days to accommodate additional time required for the removal of hazardous materials prior to the demolition of Mclaughlin Middle School. In addition, part of the schedule extension is a result of lost work time due to adverse weather smoke conditions. Workers were not able to work outdoors during the unhealthy air conditions resulting from the forest fires. The fund source is a capital projects fund. It's a recommendation that the board of directors approves a change order for Mclaughlin Middle School with Skanska USA Building in the amount of $373,888 plus Washington State sales tax, and that the superintendent be authorized to execute the change order document.
All right, thank you. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move.
Thank you, Kyle. And a second?
This is Kathy. I second.
Thank you, Kathy. All right, any discussion or questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the vote. Director Banfield,
Approve.
Director Barrows,
Approve.
Director Decker,
Approve.
Director Sproul,
Approve.
and I will also vote yes to approve, so the motion passes. All right, and that brings us to the end of our regular business, shorter agenda today, which means we're going to move on to reports. We do have several reports tonight, starting with a KPODS update. So I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Webb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If it's possible, if I could switch the order and actually do the budget update first, because it does have some connections to some of the conversations related to in-person learning and then transition to the K-Pod update.
Sure, of course. Thank you.
Okay. The board has asked for a 2021 budget update in light of pandemic-related revenue loss in several areas. A $10 million loss to enrollment decline, a $3 million loss of levy equalization revenue from the state, and the potential worst-case loss of nutrition services revenue of more than $1 million and nearly $10 million in transportation funding due to a full year of remote learning. We're facing, in the worst case, a loss of $24 million in revenue in this fiscal year. As you know, on October 13th, we shared our recommended set of solutions to address the enrollment revenue loss known at that time. We also reported that nutrition services and transportation services revenue could be impacted by remote learning. This projection has borne out over the last 2 months, and the longer we're in remote learning, the greater the impact is on those two designated revenue streams. Brett's presentation will begin with an updated numbers from the October 13th presentation. Then Brett will compare the budget impact with 3 budget models given our staffing needs and requirements for remote learning. One model, end of January, the second model, the end of spring break, and the final model, the end of the school year. The magnitude of the board budget shortfall ranges from $5 million to $7.5 million. However, I'm increasingly optimistic that 2 additional revenue streams would help address this shortfall. The second wave of federal education stabilization stimulus dollars and a hold harmless legislative provision in transportation. If those funding streams materialize, it's likely that we'll be able to balance the budget without additional cuts or use of additional fund balance. If those resources do not materialize through congressional or legislative action, I will recommend to the board that we tap deeper into fund balance. I do not recommend additional temporary layoffs or permanent cuts at this time. In fact, we've recalled nearly 35% of the hours initially reduced for remote learning, as we have expanded in-person support through special education pods and kinder pods, and we intend to expand recall as we scale up additional supports for K-12 at-risk student pods and first and second grade pods. Our team has been working on a school-based VSP recall plan to support those in-person pods and to support remote learning. Furloughed VSP employees will be recalled in waves beginning in the new year, with all affected VSP members returning by the end of January. Besides the $3 million planned spend down in the workforce stabilization designated reserve, we have a designated reserve of just over $6 million for startup staffing costs associated with the 25th Avenue School and VITA. Historically, we plan well in advance of opening schools, knowing that we will need a new principal, secretary, clerks, custodians to staff the new schools at opening without reassigning from other locations or reducing hours proportionately by sites affected by new school openings. We could choose to apply some or all of this designated reserve for this school year, giving us another year to assess the staffing implications for the new schools upon opening without layoffs or position cuts. As the board is aware, you have a fund balance target of 3 to 8% in board policy. With the existing spend down of a $4 million transfer to the Transportation Vehicle Fund and a planned $3 million spend down from workforce stabilization, the board budgeted fund balance for 2021 is approximately 8%. If it were necessary to use the full $6 million from the new school staffing designated reserve account to balance the budget, the district's fund balance would be just below 6%. well within the targeted range established by board policy. I'm going to turn this over to Brett. Brett's going to walk this through, and we'll be happy to respond to any questions. Brett?
All right, thank you, Dr. Webb. I'll share my screen so that we can use some slides to guide our conversation. All right, I'll give it a sec. Sometimes there's a lag effect on that. Wendy, I can see you. Are you able to see my screen yet?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so as Dr. Webb alluded to, this is a model that you've seen various iterations of throughout the fall. We can now update a couple revenue factors. The basic ed enrollment, BEA stands for basic ed allocation. That apportionment revenue category, we're now projecting, it's a little worse than what we started the year with. We're projecting now annual average will be about 950 less than budget, which translates to about $9.5 million in lost revenue compared to budget. On the special ed side, the situation seems to be improving. We were able to count retroactively a few students in the fall whose IEPs were in limbo because of COVID. OSPI amended their rules justifiably because of that. That increased our baseline data that we were using to project out into the rest of the year. The net effect is still about a $650,000 revenue shortfall on special ed relating to enrollment. As we briefed you in a memo a couple weeks ago, the OSPI final calculations for our levy equalization, and again, we can go on for about a half hour on all of the details and moving parts within the equalization calculation. However, suffice to say the OSPI estimates from the spring compared to their final amended versions were about 3.5 million, it's about 3.1 million, excuse me, $3.1 million less than what we budgeted based on the estimates at that time. On the positive side, we were successful in navigating the gauntlet of bureaucracy associated with our FEMA claim. A certain category of PPE investments that we made were reimbursed at a 75% or 75 cents on the dollar basis. That amounted to about $350,000 that we were told not to expect, and we certainly didn't expect until we got the funding commitment just about 2 weeks ago. The total effect of all of these deviations from the original budget is just slightly less than $13 million less than budgeted revenue. Moving over to the expenditure side, as we've discussed in the past, in the original budget, we set aside a certain number of budgeted positions so that we can deploy them strategically to address spikes, or sometimes we call them hotspots of enrollment, where we're surprised by where there's a spike on a particular grade at a school or in a certain content area at the secondary schools. That amounted to $2.345 million that we did not need to deploy because the overall enrollment was so low. There were very few of those hotspots, and those that did occur, we were able to reassign existing staff to meet that versus deploy these held back. Again, $2.345 million in savings there. We've instituted a district office hiring freeze on any vacancies, and we've honored that with all vacancies that I'm aware of. There could be a few mission critical ones that we have to assess, but as of right now, all those vacancies have been held in the freeze. That amounts to about $415,000 of annualized savings. The temporary layoffs of basic ed allocation associated staff that we've implemented, if that were to extend through the end of January, which was the scenario we were asked to analyze as a baseline, that would be about $2.1 million. It's important to remember that's net of the unemployment cost. The actual salary benefit savings would be greater than that, but we know that we have some unemployment claim exposure that nets to $2.1 million. We had a vacant position in school administration at Walnut Grove Elementary. The salary and benefits associated with that position were $82,500. We will not be filling that in light of the circumstances. And lastly, for this page, we can quantify based on a series of assumptions. Again, if we didn't expand any in-person services through the end of January, that we could save about $1.15 million in substitutes. Obviously, with every pod that we add, the incremental savings is eroded there because the more students and staff we have on site, the more substitutes we're required to employ. Those measures totaled up to $6.1 million. There's some other items that we can now quantify, and some of these you've seen before. Those non-temporary layoff staff that I alluded to on the first slide, their unemployment is embedded in that net figure. However, there's other employees, primarily substitutes, that have established enough work pattern to qualify for unemployment with Employment Securities Division. The cost of their unemployment claims for 2 quarters is estimated at about $500,000. That hasn't changed since the original scenario we shared. Non-grant travel, obviously in light of the safety circumstances we find ourselves in, we're not going to be able to capitalize on dollars that were budgeted to achieve professional development travel related expenses. Those total up to about $120,000. Co-curricular savings, which primarily is athletics, but there are a number of other elements of this. If we assume that we are not operating schools through the end of January, we would assume that we're not offering a whole lot of extracurricular opportunities, and WIAA obviously has kind of the guidance, is providing the guidance on the athletics. Anyway, we're quantifying that to be about $1.5 million in potential savings as if it were to extend through January. As we've discussed in previous board meetings, we have gone through all of the departments that support instruction in our schools. Centrally, those would include curriculum, assessment, our operations department, safe and supportive, and FCRCs. And we believe just because of the nature of the instructional model, that we can, without impact to students, recapture about $750,000 of items and initiatives they are unable to deploy because of the safety precautions. And then lastly, which we've talked about again throughout this process, we have established a workforce stabilization reserve within our fund balance of $3 million. We would fully expect, in light of the circumstances, that we need to deploy that full $3 million. Those measures add up to 4.87, as you can see. And again, as we've discussed throughout, but just to earmark a few of the items that Dr. Webb's already alluded to, we have to keep our eye on a few other balls. Those items were basically our special ed and basic ed factors. On the positive side, there seems to be growing momentum for a second, it would be a second K-12 dedicated stimulus. I think it's the 5th or 6th overall stimulus bill that's being contemplated. But again, it would be the second one that would directly benefit K-12. That could provide significant relief were that to continue to progress through the legislative or congressional deliberations. When we talk about transportation and nutrition services, we would like to believe that because they generate dedicated revenue, that we can adjust expenditures to, in essence, balance to whatever their adjusted revenues are. However, the way those revenues are earned and the services that we're required to be providing don't always allow that to happen. And those details are starting to come in focus. For instance, transportation. The fact that we didn't have other than just a handful of special ed students riding buses as of October 25th, which I think was the cutoff for the first ridership report. And again, by way of review, there's 3 ridership reporting windows or trimesters, if you will. And if we don't have students on the buses by the time those ridership windows close, then in essence, we lose the revenue that those students would have generated. For the October report, the first trimester, that's about $2.5 million. Of that, we could expect to recoup about 1.2 million, excuse me, in savings from staff that we would resign ourselves to that we've resigned ourselves to the temporary layoffs, and then obviously fuel and some of the maintenance on the buses could total 1.2 million. Now, again, that's probably a little bit high now that we're running some pods and we're putting more buses on the road. But we're talking about approximately 1.2 million in potential savings through January. If we were to not have a good number of students attending by the end of, or really it's January 22nd, we would lose the second ridership window, or it would be significantly eroded if we only had a small number of pods and students going. That could total $3.5 to $4 million of lost transportation revenue. Prior to opening the kindergarten pods and contemplating any at-risk pods that would require transportation, we have the potential to save about $17,000 a day. Now, again, as we've added pods, whether there's one or three students on a bus, the cost of the driver, the cost of the fuel is not incrementally adjusted. So we've seen a pretty substantial erosion of our savings, but unfortunately not a whole lot of additional revenue as a result of those transitions in transportation. Nutrition services, projecting losses through January of about 700,000. As we look forward to what it might look like in beyond January 31st, it's very, very difficult because if we stayed with the pod, building a staffing model is predicated on how many students are there, how practical is it to provide grab and go type services versus in-school services. We don't have a lot of baseline data on what the participation impact might be. We can certainly model the attendance levels, but we might anticipate that there might be families that are a little more resistant to partaking in a meal that they don't fully prepare and control. So it's really difficult, if not impossible, to anticipate what the future of nutrition services looks like until we can really start to talk about not only the attendance model, but what are the practical service options we might have. So to summarize the variables that have come into focus, as the first slide addressed, there's about $12.9 million in revenue shortfall relating to attendance, enrollment, and some of the state categories like enrollment, or excuse me, levy equalization with some FEMA adjustments. The second page of this presentation highlighted some staff adjustments and savings totaling just under 6.1 million. The next page talked about the use of the dedicated employment stabilization reserve, as well as a few other adjustments to our expenditures that totaled 4.87 million. Now we can reasonably forecast that the first ridership window, the net of the 2.5 lost revenue minus the 1.2 potential savings we were calculating and forecasting, nets to 1.3 million relating to the first ridership window. The second ridership window, were we to not return by January, I think it's 22nd, would be about a $3.5 million loss in revenue with little less savings to be applied to that because, again, the cost of running pods with very, very low numbers of riders on each bus. And then lastly, again, focusing on the January 31st cutoff for this analysis, our projected nutrition services deficit is that 700,000. So again, this January 31st model looks like just under $7.5 million net deficit after the revenue and expenditure adjustments are combined. A couple footnotes that I think we've already addressed, but with that second ridership, what I've indicated on here is kind of the high water mark in terms of the revenue loss. There would be some savings that can be applied, but again, it's eroding from that $17,000 per day that was originally calculated. So there was some interest, as Dr. Webb previewed, in looking at those types of factors and looking at it through the lens of what would it look like, not just with the January 31st end of distance learning and the staffing configurations that we're currently living with, But what if those conditions were to extend through spring break, which would be the second column of numbers over, or what if they extended throughout the entire school year and we did not break from the current model throughout the entire school year? So again, we can certainly address questions, but I'll quickly just dash through a few of the variables that have the most impact as we contemplate those types of scenarios hypothetically. As you can see, the revenue really doesn't change. Now, an argument could be made that if we stay remote longer, we could see more attrition in our enrollment, but that's difficult to capture how many families have other options, how frustrated families may become with remote. So I chose to just leave it stagnant with all three scenarios reflecting the $12.9 million revenue loss relating to those basic ed and special ed enrollment categories. As we move down into the expenditure areas, you can see that the holdbacks don't change. That was a one-time savings opportunity from our original budget. The hiring freeze, we would anticipate, it's hard to forecast more specifically, but we might anticipate we might have a few more vacancies that pop up for a variety of reasons. And if we did not fill those vacancies, our savings could grow to, and again, I'd be the first to admit these are somewhat wild guesses, but 475,000 if we had one or two positions for half of a year, and then possibly 500,000 as those vacancies were left throughout the full school year. The basic ed allocation classified layoffs, you can see if we stayed with the previous assumptions, which is, okay, we start at bringing staff back at the end of January, you can see, or after the end of January, excuse me, the savings to date through that point would have been $2.1 million approximately. Extending that through spring break would extend the savings potential another 900,000 approximately, and then extending that through the entire school year would be about a $4 million savings figure. The building administrator, you can see, doesn't change. That was a one-time. Substitutes, again, a little bit of a wild guess here around some of the assumptions that we don't necessarily control in terms of how many staff we may have serving pods. But I've forecasted that if we stayed in this basic model of instruction through spring break, that might grow to 1.5 million. And then you can see 2 million if it stayed throughout the entire school year. No change on the travel. That's basically the entire sum of those travel. We would anticipate even if school were to return at the end of or after January 31st, we still would probably be on highly limited travel opportunities and needs. So we would continue that 120 for the entire year. Moving it down for unemployment for subs. Again, some of this has to do with what's being debated in Washington, D.C., but without an intervention, some of these folks would fall off of the unemployment eligibility. Some of these subs that established the work pattern prior to the remote learning implementation last spring. But it could be that there's an extension. It could be that a few of them continue to qualify with the limited amount of subbing that they're doing. Difficult to forecast more precisely, but I've used 600,000, as you can see, as kind of a possible cap on that, say, expenditure exposure. Moving down to the co-curricular, again, the longer we would assume that it's not safe or practical to have on-site instruction, we would assume that it's not safe and practical to have extracurricular or co-curricular activities. So the savings potential could go from 1.5 to 2.5 or possibly $4 million if it was not offered throughout the entire year. Moving on to the departmental budgets, I think it would be worth, I didn't do the exercise, but it would be worth going back through as the potential remote learning is extended closer to or through spring break. We would do another review of those supporting departmental budgets to say how practical is that, how practical are those budgets to be deployed on this extended remote learning model. You could see the estimate, we could get from 750 up to 900,000 and then potentially $1 million. Workforce stabilization is a one-time capped amount, so you can see that stays stagnant for the purposes of this projection. Moving down to the traditionally self-funded programs, you can see that nutrition services, the losses could extend to $1 million through spring break and possibly $1.25 million if it were to continue throughout the entire school year as the current model exists. Transportation, you can see that the revenue loss side of the equation doesn't change between the end of January and spring break because we would have missed both of the first two reporting windows under either of those scenarios. It swells another, what, 3.75 million if we do not return. I think it's April 21st, if I'm not mistaken, is the close of the third reporting window or ridership window. Since that would be after spring break, there's a chance we would still get that under the spring break scenario, but we wouldn't get it by the end of school year. And then lastly, transportation expenditure savings. Again, depending on how quickly we can ramp up pods, some of these savings may be less than that, but for a placeholder, I recognize that there could be some incremental savings if we stay largely in remote. But again, just a marker there, those numbers could go down as pods expand, or they could go up as routes are, excuse me, as routes are discontinued for whatever reason. The grand total scenarios you can see are the 7.4 or just under 7.5 million as the end of January. The savings erodes that deficit to just over 5 million if we were to stay out through spring break, but then it bumps back up again because we have some savings, but we lose a big chunk of revenue in the transportation specifically if we stayed out all year. So I think Dr. Webb alluded to a $5 to $7.5 million net challenge that we're still faced with. You can kind of see the framework of those assumptions and those scenarios here. With that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Thank you. First of all, let me say thank you for putting that together. I know that it's incredibly challenging because there's a lot of guesswork that goes into putting a table like that together, but it really is illustrative and helpful, I think, to kind of see it all laid out like that. I have a couple quick questions, and then I'll open it up to the other board directors. First of all, can I ask, I think Dr. Webb, when you previewed this, you said that all affected ESP staff would be returned by the end of January. Did I hear that correctly?
You did. We're going to begin recall waves in the new year, and by the end of January, all affected ESP employees would be recalled from the temporary layoffs.
And that includes the clerks, the secretaries, the paras, all categories?
That's correct. We're trying to line up the additional supports that are necessary and needed, not just as we contemplate additional pod expansion supports for in-person learning, but really to shore up our remote learning supports as well.
Excellent, thank you. So I guess follow-up question for Brett then, that was not reflected in the table that we just looked at. It didn't look like it was.
Correct. And
okay.
So this table was constructed saying basically applied the previous set of some assumptions and variables that we had been using to just simply changing when we might have the end of remote learning and transition to hybrid or full attendance. So what we can reasonably kind of just high level model here is if the savings through January was 2.1 million, but it potentially was going to grow to $3 or $4 million in those other scenarios, you can almost add roughly $1 million because some of that 2.1 is going to be deployed sooner than the end of January. So you can almost add $1 million to the bottom line of the second and third scenario to kind of remodel under these new assumptions.
Okay, thank you. Then I also have a question about the federal stimulus money. You said there was the initial one. We've had one so far. Can you remind me how much we got out of that first federal stimulus bill?
Yeah, it was $5.4 million.
Okay, and that was accounted for in the 12.9 million that had already kind of been accounted for.
Yeah, we actually claimed and booked that into there's a small amount that spilled into the 2021 school year, but the lion's share of it was claimed and spent in the 1920 fiscal year, which is part of the reason we were able to create the Employment Stabilization Fund.
Right. Okay. So then my last question is, you mentioned the $3 million transfer to transportation and the $3 million of that staffing stabilization fund, and that's coming from reserves.
It was actually $4 million that we transferred at the beginning of the 2019-20 fiscal year to transportation. And then we're anticipating in the 2020-21 fiscal year to utilize the $3 million Employment Stabilization Fund. It hasn't been liquidated yet, but we're modeling and expecting that will need to be brought to bear.
Okay, those are all my questions for right now, but I'm sure I'm going to have more. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to the rest of the board for any questions they might have.
Well, you took my first question, this is Kathy, because that's what I thought I heard Dr. Webb say as well, was that basically all of our VASP employees would be reinstated by the end of January, which is great news, particularly given all the other information that we had about how well our secondary kids are doing. So that's terrific. I just have one quick question, Brett, and that was, you said a significant number of ridership. Could you tell me what a significant number would be, just so I know what I'm going up against?
Yeah, I'm not exactly connecting with where and how I use the word significant, but if the question is under a normal set of circumstances, obviously not all of our students ride buses, but it is pretty consistent year over year.
Right.
And so we can then use that to predict the revenue that we would get if we had a normal set of circumstances. What I'm reflecting is basically the pittance of ridership that we have now compared to those normal year bases. And that's a significant difference, obviously, because in October, I don't know, we might have had, it might have been 100 students riding a bus versus, 8 to 12,000. I don't have that figure in front of me.
Okay, yeah, so just to throw this scenario out, if we did expand in the way that Dr. Webb mentioned, would that be, obviously it wouldn't be up to what we would normally do, but would that reduce our losses?
Actually, I would say the question is a financial question, so I'm going to answer it from a financial basis.
That's what I want you to do.
not presume to say it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do.
No, I get it. Thank you.
But from a financial basis only, it's actually hurts us a little bit because we know that the incremental revenue that a small number of students riding a bus generates does not cover the entire cost of the driver and the fuel for that bus that normally is funded. I'll use an example. If our average buses have 50 to 60 students on them, and we in essence break even in transportation, then we need 50 or 60 students per bus to cover the costs that we have associated with driver salary, benefits, and fuel and maintenance.
Gotcha.
So only having 3 or 4 kids on that bus puts us in it creates a financial challenge.
Right. And if we were, let's say, full hybrid, where it was basically it would be half the ridership, does that still put us in a deficit?
It would definitely keep us in the deficit, but in very, very simplistic terms, it would cut our deficit, those revenue hits in half. So instead of 3.5 to 4 million, we might be talking about $1.5 to $2 million of lost revenue.
All right, thanks, Brett.
And if I could just jump in here from a macro policy perspective, this hold harmless provision that's necessary in order to true up the kind of supports that districts all across the state are providing is absolutely necessary and essential. And there is a growing understanding and awareness on both sides of the aisle and in the leadership of both caucuses relative to a solution that attends to this. You know, the bottom line is this revenue generating formula for transportation never contemplated a pandemic. And so with our kinder pods, those of us who've been out at schools welcoming our youngest learners back into classrooms during that first week, many of those buses were transporting one student. And that one student in the seat is not sufficient to cover any of our costs. And I think legislators are beginning to understand the complexities of what we're being confronted with, and for that matter, moving forward, some necessary evolution of our transportation funding formula moving forward.
It does seem like a shame that we would be hit financially for trying to do well by these kids that are struggling. It really is a shame.
I think, you know, to parrot Dr. Webb's point, I think that's exactly what's starting to resonate with some legislators to say, you know, you spoke specifically to the K-pods, but when we look at our special education population, there's a legal and moral obligation there that doesn't give us the choice to say, well, the funding formula doesn't really recognize this. So we have even more compelling reasons to run limited numbers of students on routes for special ed.
I'm curious about the data. I mean, Dr. Webb just mentioned that some of the buses for kindergartners have only one student. As we look at these scenarios through the end of the year, especially on ridership numbers, it seems just like nutrition services families may be being uncomfortable about not wanting other people to prepare their children's meals at the tail end of a pandemic, or hopefully tail end of a pandemic, but ridership as well. I'm just curious how, and maybe we haven't done this analysis, but as parents, the intent, some of the surveys that we've filled out indicated our comfort level with buses and how that compares to the actual of the kinder data. And then to expand it out as we bring more small groups in and the buses potentially might get more crowded, could there be an impact on parents' comfort level sending their kids on a bus? I'm just wondering how we need to provide this service, and it's punitive in this funding model to our district like it is to all the other districts. I'm just wondering how the data kind of compares to what we anticipated with ridership.
Well, you're right. We have not done that sort of crosswalk relative to the initial responses to the survey and who's actually riding the buses with the K-pods. I can certainly evaluate whether or not that level of analysis can be done. What I do suspect is that as we begin bringing more pods of in-person small group support into our schools, that we will see, certainly more students being transported, but many families are in fact choosing to transport their own children. And I don't know, where the sweet spot is in terms of finding a solution to that conundrum. Nevertheless, we do have an obligation to provide those transportation services to those families and children.
No, it's probably not an important exercise. It just seems as a parent myself, as I am eager to have my children have the opportunity to start going back to school, I would probably be pretty hesitant to put them on the school bus this spring until there's more vaccine information available. So we're in this impossible spot, and it just looks like this ridership data could be compelling in our lobbying efforts, of course, for hold harmless, because there are parents that are perfectly comfortable sending their children to school, but are not going to send their children on the school bus, and that becomes extremely punitive financially.
I have a question, Dr. Webb. You mentioned by the end of January, all of the furloughed employees will be back, and it sounded like there were phases, and that starts at the beginning of January.
As we enter the new year, we will begin rolling out waves of recalls. We're working on that plan currently, so I don't have any more specifics. Once it's finalized, I'll make sure that the board is briefed.
Okay, that's what I was curious, because I know if I was a furloughed employee, I would, be curious and, for planning to know, am I going to be, going back at the beginning of January or towards the end? So there will be kind of a, that will be a plan that will be notified to all of the employees of kind of when they can anticipate being recalled.
Correct.
And it's not all furloughed employees, it's all VAESP for furloughed employees.
That's correct.
Oh, yes, thank you for the clarification.
So I think when you continue to work on that and brief the board, what would be helpful for me is understanding the allocation of those recalled staff, specifically in regards to, I understand we'll be bringing in hopefully new pods of students, but as we just got first trimester grade reports, and how many additional staff and how they would be used and leveraged to support our students who aren't going to meet the threshold to be brought back into school, but clearly need additional learning support.
Correct. That's part of the planning work that's currently underway.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was my question as well, and I'm glad that it was addressed. And you did say they were being brought back to help bolster this virtual learning. I have a lot of compassion for what everyone's going through out there. Teachers not wanting to get back, and I completely understand. But obviously, the system is failing, and a lot of times when we hear our educators come and speak, the one and only response we get is to get this extra staff in to support this virtual learning. And I don't know. I have no idea. I'm trying to educate myself along the way, whether it's the silver bullet or not. So I'm hoping that people are going to be open, that this, our children's education is essential. Our teachers are essential employees, just like our, doctors and our nurses and our police officers and our prosecutors. So at some point, when we realize this is a failing system, we are going to have solutions. And I'm hoping that this is going to be, support that. But our most vulnerable students are the ones that are failing in this system. And I don't know how we allocate those resources so that that doesn't happen, but I can tell you right now, it's extremely disappointing, and it's nobody's fault per se, but we can't keep saying no, no, no. We should try new solutions, but at some point we have to open it up for these kids, or they might as well just not have a school year. And that's a large group of children, mostly minorities or disabled or whatever. So we're gonna have to think of really, creative solutions, and we have to be open that at some point we have to get back into the school, or we can just count the school year off for those students.
That certainly is part of our deliberations and planning. And as Kyle and Tracy know, part of our regional advocacy efforts is to amplify and highlight the learning loss that is occurring, not just in Vancouver Public Schools, but throughout Clark County and frankly, throughout the nation. We've got to elevate this notion of additional resources in order to not just stabilize the learning experience this year, but frankly, to provide compensatory support as a function of almost a full year of full remote learning for all of our students and for most of the students in Washington State. I was on a call today with the State Superintendent, Chris Reichtel. That is a priority that OSPI is bringing forward in their legislative budget request. Of course, what we really need is we need our friends in the other Washington to reach agreement on the next stimulus, because much of the challenges that the legislature faces just from a budgeting, its own budgeting context, will rely on a significant portion of funding as a result of that stimulus. And of course, as you know, we've seen the revenue forecast improve at the state level from the $9 billion to roughly $3.5 billion. And we know that the state's rainy day fund has slightly over $3 billion. So the question, of course, is how do you make up the difference and what additional investments can be made as long as we get vaccinations to scale, deployed, get people back to work, get children back to school, and the economy continues to improve. The revenue forecast could also improve over the course of the biennial budget, but there's a lot of moving pieces here, right?
So just one more thing, and it may sound a little bit ignorant, but as we prepare and we get ready to push these people out, I just hope we're thinking of that. All of our learners, which is what our teachers tell us all the time, they learn in so many different ways. And it's the thing that's been lost with this virtual learning. It just seems like we're shoving everything in one direction. And some kids are we have to find a way that they can use, use different ways to learn. So I just hope that we consider that when we're pushing the extra bodies out.
Thanks, Kamara.
I want to add, Dr. Webb, thank you for that. I learned a lot from the ESD legislative meeting last week, and I think to Kamara's point, recognizing that I think my big takeaway, besides the extreme budget woes that public schools are facing right now, is that what we are facing as we come out of this pandemic is not a return to our old normal, but kind of finding a new normal, because we have a growing achievement gap, and how we provide the supports to bring our kids forward, but then also continue to kind of bring the education to the students. So I appreciate that it's the focus of OSPI as well, of what that looks like as we transition out of this very, very hard year of remote learning, because as we bring our kids back, there are just so many gaps that we're going to have to support and make up. Just to touch on that, and I think I know I've asked this question, but bringing our support students or our support staff back to support some of these pods and looking at the breakdown of supporting remote learning, I know that a lot of the feedback I've specifically gotten from educators is the ability when they're in remote learning to engage one-on-one, to make contact with those who are not participating. So if you don't necessarily fall into a tier that would be brought in for a pod, but the support staff that can help with that family engagement, because it seems, I see it on my middle schoolers, there's a lot of students with the cameras off or don't participate, don't attend, and that's a lot of follow-up for the individual teacher. So just kind of, I know that attendance is often very directly correlated to our success and our grades. So kind of what support mechanisms will be able to apply towards that engagement piece. And I know the planning is still in process.
And if I can just step in, I think this is where allowing the individual building administrators to work with their staff to determine what works best, how to utilize who they have and what they have to support their school community best. Because what someone needs at Lakeshore, what the community needs at Lakeshore isn't necessarily going to be what the community needs even just down the road at Eisenhower, or further down the road at Hazeldale, and further down the road at Sarah J. Each of those communities is going to need to utilize their staff and their resources differently. And I think that, and I'm hoping that that's the plan, is that these building communities are going to be able to determine, this is what our community needs, and this is how we're going to use the resources, and let them be flexible with how they do it, because they're the ones that know their individual communities the best, and doing it at a higher level just adds all sorts of different layers of misinterpretation of data and not understanding certain intricate details of families, whereas the building administrators and their staff, they know those families so well, and they know what those families need.
I think that's a great point, Kathy, because when we had the presentations from all the different schools and what they were doing, it was really interesting to hear all the different things each school was doing and how it made them successful and how it engaged the kids. So I feel like, I mean, at my kids' school, they're starting to implement some of the stuff that was at some of the other schools. It's great to have these other schools kind of stir things up, look at them, and push them out to the group. And I think that's great. That's something that our district does do.
The answers are yes, yes, and yes. This is a terrific segue to the next topic. Unless there are any additional questions you have for Brett on this budget outlook and the budget modeling, we'll go ahead and transition to the update on KPOD's student performance and in-person learning.
I do have a couple, I think, quick questions.
Okay.
For Brett. Looking at, well, the slide works actually. The co-curricular, the savings from co-curricular, you mentioned athletics, and I'm used to thinking of co-curricular and extracurricular in two different ways. Does this include any savings from extracurricular as well?
Yeah, that's basically, it would be our clubs. It would be, certain things are paid for directly out of ASB, as I'm sure you're aware.
Right.
But it would be the general fund contribution towards clubs and as well as sports. Athletics is certainly the lion's share of these dollars, though, for sure.
Okay, so I think of co-curricular and I think of like band concerts and things like that. So this includes extracurricular savings as well. And then my other question is the travel, the savings from travel. On the other side, it was identified as BEA-special ed.
Yeah, so we budget a certain amount, actually a pretty decent amount of travel within our grants. And so the main heading is non-grant travel. So BEA stands for Basic Ed Allocation and Special Ed. So that's really where the concentration of these non-grant travel dollars reside. And the reason we excluded grants is not because the grant folks are going to be jumping on any planes or registering for any hotels in Seattle. It's the fact that we have to redirect those dollars or carry them over in a dedicated fund. So we really can't repurpose those dollars.
Right, okay. I was just curious I didn't know if it was just special ed or if it was basic ed and special ed.
Yeah,
okay. And then there's just kind of two points, and I think this is more for Steve actually. The plan to bring the pairs back by the end of January, which is excellent, and I'm glad to hear that, because I think it was Kamara that said it may not be the silver bullet, and I can tell you after 2 decades in public education, there are no silver bullets. They don't exist. But it's amazing what you can do when you have more people working together to accomplish something. And I think that's good news for our students to hear that those supports are going to be coming in place. And I know that it's a complicated process, and so I want to thank Kathy Everidge in advance for her work that she has ahead of her, and I really appreciate all of your efforts around all of this. I would encourage, I understand the plan is still in being created, but I'm just thinking of those students who are struggling right now for first semester. And by the end of January, first semester is going to be over. And trying to get those supports to those students just as quickly as we possibly can, I think is really important. And the other thing this is bugging me, and I'm sorry, and maybe it's just a me thing, but the savings from the building administrator at Walnut Grove, which is saving us a grand total of $82,000, and we're looking at millions here, and that just seems like such a, I don't want to say insignificant, because nothing's insignificant, but it just seems like I know Walnut Grove has got to be really needing that building administrator, frankly. Is there any thought as to go like hiring that building administrator for the second half of the year, so that, I mean, I that's one of our biggest schools, and I know they've got to be really feeling the loss of that admin at their building.
Not only is it one of our biggest schools, but it's also one of our schools with both high ELL and high free and reduced lunch.
I'll sit down with the team and review the current workload challenges that may be facing rest of the team at Walnut Grove and evaluate whether or not we need to bring additional support.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and that's all of my questions. Thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Brett. We're going to transition to Mike and rest of the team in just a moment, but before I do, I've got a few remarks relative to in-person learning. Public schools, teachers, and staff, superintendents, and school boards across the nation have been asked to do the impossible, to deliver a high-quality education to all students while ensuring the health and wellness of our children, families, and employees, and to do our part in containing community spread of COVID-19. Pandemic-related revenue shortfalls and a largely inadequate national response to this crisis, I'm going to say that again, pandemic-related revenue shortfalls and a largely inadequate national response to this crisis have impacted both public institutions and private businesses. The vital role of schools in managing the pandemic has been used by some people to politicize and polarize. The resulting conflict has demoralized and frustrated many educators, including me. So I get it. I feel our collective pain. Nevertheless, we must shape a forward path to providing some in-person support for our students this school year. And we can do it safely, consistent with existing CDC and Washington Department of Health guidance and in partnership with Clark County Public Health. I fully recognize that miracles have been worked in Vancouver Public Schools, and I'm so grateful to our students, staff, and families. But unfortunately, context matters. Those students with the greatest need are doing less well in remote learning. According to recent stories published in the Washington Post and the Boston Globe, school districts from coast to coast, have reported the number of students failing classes has risen by as many as 2 or 3 times, with English language learners and disabled and disadvantaged students struggling the most. The same trend is true for Vancouver Public Schools and other Clark County school districts. Those students farthest from educational justice are being disproportionately impacted by the pandemic and remote learning in spite of our collective very best efforts. As you know, the team will provide an update on KinderPods, which began November 16th. The team also will share 612 DF data from the last marking period. Additionally, we've been planning for at-risk pods to begin on January 7th. We'll spend more time at the December 15th board workshop reviewing that plan. And finally, consistent with our kinder parts, we started to plan for a possible sequence of gradually adding small group in-person pods to support learning for our youngest learners in grades 1 and 2. Again, consistent with the existing Clark County Public Health and Washington Department of Health guidance. Potential start dates, and I do want to emphasize potential, start dates are February 1st for first grade pods and February 22nd for second grade pods. Our team is also working collaboratively and creatively to assess how we might better use those educators who would prefer a full remote assignment moving forward, including those kindergarten teachers that have been forced to take a leave. By March, we'll have a better sense of whether or not we can advance beyond K2 pods. Of course, we'll continue to consult and collaborate with Clark County Public Health along the way, monitor the data and the impact of the pandemic to assess a go-forward plan. So with that, I'll turn this over to Mike.
Thank you, Dr. Webb. I'll lead right in with the group here. We have a number of slides to cover here, or as I want to say, a good amount of ground to cover relative to kindergarten pod update and the EL homeless and at-risk pod planning update that we've talked about a little. We'll cover a little more detail today, and we can cover even more detail next week. But with that, I'd ask that we hold on questions till the end. Dr. John Proctor, our Director of Assessment and Performance Management, and Christina Eiermunger will lead off in sharing the kindergarten survey data. That survey took place last week between Monday, November 30th and December 3rd. And that will lead to Jim and Janelle providing a quick overview of the data analysis, and that I think you've already received some of that information, but we want to highlight that relative to then how it really leads into our planning to bring in-person instruction to our EL homeless and at-risk and seniors who are struggling. So, and that we're planning on January 7th. John is going to be the driver here on this PowerPoint. That's for the other folks who are speaking. And when our other team members' slides come out, please let John know and he will forward that slide. So we're hopefully a little seamless in our transitions here. Okay. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Christina.
All right, to get us going, I'm just going to set the context of this particular survey. The survey was done to try to obtain some early feedback with regards to the K-Pod experience. And so we generally asked 3 similar questions between our parents and our teachers. We were looking at minutes of live instruction, we were looking at the experience to date, and then the safety measures. And then we did add an open-ended question, which we always get really great feedback, really heartfelt feedback. And so we do learn a lot from those particular responses. So we did distribute this to teachers and parents of kindergarten students. We began at November 30th, as Mike said, and it closed on December 3rd. And we had an 87% response rate from teachers and a parent response rate of 52%. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John to kind of walk through the slides of what the data shows us.
Thanks, Christina. So as Christina said, we asked 3 questions in both surveys. They mirrored each other. So I'll start with the kindergarten teacher survey data and results. So that first question, how many minutes of live instruction do you typically provide for remote learners in a day? So 60% of teachers were in that 30 to 59 minute range. 26% were in that 1 to 2 hour range, and 14% provided 2 or more hours remote learning of live instruction for remote learners in a day. Next, we asked, my school has created a safe and health learning environment. So statement, the agreement here, 80% of teachers agreed with that statement, that their school had created a safe and healthy learning environment. Only 14% disagreed with that statement. And then 6% were in that neutral category of neither agreeing nor disagreeing. returning to in-person teaching has been a positive experience. So again, a statement using our agreement scale, 48% of teachers who responded agreed with that statement, compared to 34% who disagreed, and another 17% in that neutral category. So as Christina mentioned, we did ask this open-ended question: is there anything else you'd like to share that might help inform programming? So in order to analyze this, we use our survey platform as Qualtrics, and they have a text IQ analytics function in there that creates what's called sentiment analysis. So what we're trying to do in sentiment analysis is we're trying to quantify responses into negative, positive, mixed, or neutral, and then get a count or percentage of those responses. And the second thing we're trying to do is we're trying to create, so we get an overall sentiment score. And the second thing we're trying to do is trying to pull out topics from those responses. So we get topic scores on sentiments as well. So in the teacher survey, 50 kindergarten teachers provided responses out of 73. So that was a 68% response rate just for this open-ended question. Responses predominantly addressed COVID-19 safety concerns and an inability to equitably deliver a quality education for both hybrid and remote learners. So you can see on our donut graph here, we've got 66% of those 50 responses were classified or categorized as negative based on that sentiment score. 16% were positive, and then the remaining percentages fell in the mixed and neutral categories.
And I
So
do
you
want to
think-
point, oh, I'm sorry,
Oh, go
John.
ahead. No, go
I
ahead.
do want to point out that some of the comments that were made were very long and they crossed over a number of sentiments. So this is not purely like one statement was categorized as one sentiment.
Yeah, that's really important to understand. So if I use the statement, teaching and activities are excellent, but technology is not adequate, there's 3 topics there that are in that one comment or one response. So it's teaching, it's activities, and it's technology. And the ratio of positive and negative is 2 to 1. I say excellent for teaching and activities, and not adequate for technology. But it's not just the ratio that matters, it's the intensity of the comments as well. So the formulas for calculating this take the type of comments as well as the intensity of the comments. So that second component, pulling out those comments or those topic sentiments, we pull out these top 3 concerns based on frequency distribution of the comments associated with them. And those 3 top concerns were safety, equity, and effectiveness. And again, this is from the teacher survey. Just share a few comments from the teachers. Biggest challenge is having enough time to see to the learning needs of all students. I do feel stretched thin. It is so wonderful to have small groups of in-person learners in the classroom. It is helping us to really connect with some of our students who have been struggling with remote learning. I appreciate the small class size for the ability to connect with students and feel safe in doing so. And then things are going smoothly overall. With this being said, being in person does come with risks, which make me a little nervous, but I'm excited to be teaching in person with my students. So that's just a sample of some of the comments, open-ended comments we received. The parent survey, so we did ask the same 3 questions, but we also pulled in some demographics from those responses. So you can see from this, 456 of the respondents were classified as white. That's roughly 65%, with the other 35% being non-white. By language, 96% or 678 identified their home language as English, with the other 4% split between Russian and Spanish. And these are just of the responses, the respondents, which was 705 for the parent survey. So we asked parents, how many minutes of live instruction does your student typically receive in a day? 67% indicated 30 to 59 minutes. 30% were in that 1 to 2 hour range. and 4% identified that their student's child receives 2 hours or more in a day. My child's kindergarten experience since November 16th has been positive. We use November 16th because that was the implementation of the KPOD schedule. So of this, we've got 85% of parents agree that their kindergarten experience has been positive, with only 9% disagreeing and then 6% falling in the neutral category. My child's school has created a safe and healthy learning environment. This one, we have a 91% agreement from parents on that statement, with only 2% disagreeing. And again, 7% falling in that neutral category. So parents were asked the same open-ended question. Is there anything else you'd like to share that might help inform programming? Again, we're using sentiment analysis to create that donut graph and also to pull out those most salient or most important topics from those responses. So 307 parents out of 705 provided open-ended comments, roughly 44%. 36% expressed gratitude toward the efforts made by teachers, school staff, and the district to serve students in hybrid and remote, and that's our purple bar on that donut graph. 47% of those comments were categorized as negative. Negative concerns focused on the recent shift to hybrid and its impact on quality learning time and effectiveness. And then 17 participants felt they could not comment due to the limited amount of time in the KPOD schedule. And then our other percentages are both that mixed and neutral categories. So those top 3 concerns that pulled out from those topic sentiment scores mirrored the exact same from the kindergarten teacher survey. Same 3 concerns: safety, equity, and effectiveness. Then a sample of some of the comments from parents. Having in-person schools benefited my child's emotional health as well as his family's. Please let our older kids come back to school as well. Their mental and emotional health will greatly benefit from it. My son is enjoying school so much. We have seen a huge difference in his attitude and behavior since starting and being able to interact with others again. I'm so thrilled that my kindergartner has been able to have in person. I'm very impressed with all the precautions taken to ensure the safety of students and staff. No system is perfect, but I appreciate all the district has done to try to meet the needs of the kindergartners. Thank you. Hopefully my 3rd and 6th graders can have the opportunity for a hybrid model as well this year. Keep up the good work. And then finally, the in-person portion seems great. I think the days that she has hybrids seem like a little less instruction. Overall, though, going well, and the teachers are doing great. So those are the results from both of the parent and kindergarten surveys.
I think with that, we wanted to share, I know that Deborah wanted to speak to the principal input here as well in terms of that experience with parents and teachers. So Deborah, if you would, and John, you could forward. Thank you.
Absolutely. As you know, there's a real difference in a school building with kids and without kids. So it's not a surprise to anybody. I'm sure that there was a lot of excitement. The principal feedback was very positive. So many good things happening. I can tell you that just about everybody I connect with at central office was in a building those mornings of that first week, and everybody brought back the same positive excitement that the principals expressed in this slide. So John, if you'll go one more slide beyond that, I will tell you too that I saw that 14% of teachers are providing 2 hours or more of live instruction already. And I suspect that number is going to go up as we go along, because all of us who have ever learned anything new know you get better at it the more you do it. And I don't care if it's water skiing or learning Spanish. It's just that this is a fact. And we have so many teachers out there. I was in the classrooms of 2 Fruit Valley teachers the very first week we did this, and they just jumped in and started live streaming day one. And they were joyful about it. There were glitches. They just said, yeah, we'll figure this out. We'll work it out. And guess what? I was there, but many people were in a lot of other buildings who were doing similar things. But I want to tell you the best news is what's going on in that last bullet, and that is K teams are connecting with each other. And principals and their teams are meeting with principals and their teams. And there's a lot of the right kind of, best kind of PLC work going on across our schools, wherein teachers get to share what's working well with what they're doing and learn from each other. So I'm expecting just to continue to grow with this. We're going to find ways from the district perspective to support that, whether it's subs or supplemental, or it doesn't matter what it is, we'll figure out how to support it. So I just wanted to run a few of those things by you. Done, Mike.
Yep, thanks, Deborah. And I've asked Jim, as I shared earlier, and Wendy, you noted this, we wanted to highlight some of that data that was already shared with the board relative to the analysis of the DNF rates at the high school in particular, and because I think it speaks to then the following slides that Daniel will speak to in terms of addressing the significant needs of our students. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Could I just ask a question? I had questions on John Proctor's, the survey, and would now be a good time, or should I wait till the end? I'm happy to do either.
Oh, we can certainly do that now.
Well, I just was interested in the feedback. You know, I think as my board colleagues have also heard, and what we talked at length about in November was the equity concern for our remote learners, and we've continued to receive a lot of feedback. So I was curious about the survey. It blended all of the responses from parents. So looking at negative versus positive, or strongly agreeing or disagreeing, we don't necessarily have it broken out versus if you're a parent of a remote learner versus a parent of an in-person learner. Would that be easy to assess or look at?
So that question was raised additionally by another board director, and that's something that we can work on over the course of the week here and work with the team.
Okay, so the other question I have is, I noticed and to Christina's point, I think the qualitative comments add a lot of value. Is it possible for the board to get those comments just to read them if we choose to, and get a sense kind of the flavor?
Kyle, I think you're reading my mind. I sent an email earlier today with those same questions.
Sure. And
Okay.
and like I said, that's something that we can pull together. Yeah.
Well, because specifically the slide with parent comments only indicated or included parents of in-person learners, but we know from one of our recent briefings that about 30% of our kindergartners are remote. So I think that's a substantial portion of our kindergartners, and we need to make sure that we're keeping that in perspective, especially as we continue hearing these equity concerns about limited access to instructional time.
Yes, we can do it.
And sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just affirming that we can do that.
Okay, perfect. And I say it in all of these conversations. I am a full disclosure, I'm a kindergarten parent, and I will applaud the teachers and the schools. I know there's and the district office. I know a lot of effort has gone into this. And I know the teachers especially are, they have a huge burden of managing all of these little people and also connecting with these students remotely. So I think it's important for the board, at least for myself, to understand the experience both for the in-person students and then separately for the remote experience.
Sure.
And then I would be remiss if I didn't say I was concerned about the lack of Spanish speaking responses. And if we've only gotten a 52% response and 90+% of them were English speakers, I can't but believe that our data is incredibly skewed and certainly not having any kind of equity balance to it. I don't know what to do about that, but leaving this board meeting and my not pointing that out, I think I would not be doing my job. So
I want to piggyback on that because it is something I wrote down on my notes. It kind of made me take it back, and I don't know what the solution is, but I think as we continue talking about equity, I think we need to evaluate the accessibility of our surveys, because we certainly know that more than 11 of the kindergarten families are Spanish speaking. And just to make sure that data accuracy, we need to make sure that we're making these surveys, we're promoting them and making them accessible in a way that all of our families can participate.
And I'm sure once we do and I know that there's been a lot of talk about, doing our equity audit, and when that comes down the pipe, getting that information, but there's no reason why we can't start assessing what we're doing now. And are surveys the way to be equitable in this situation? Are there other ways? And again, I'm just throwing that out. I don't have a solution, and I'm not blaming or whatever, but when I saw that, when 698 of our 700 and whatever respondents were English speaking, I went, so I just want to leave that there.
I appreciate it. And like I said, we do have these interpreted, and we can always explore and look at other options.
Yeah, I just like to jump in, and I think that's great. We should look at other options, but this is, it's a community response. So it's really like, that's part of the problem with our other data. We look at how many failing students we have when we're talking about the middle schools and the high schools and which categories they're in. It's not just that they don't take the time. A lot of communities might not take that time to respond to a survey because they've got a lot of other things going on, and they expect their education to be happening outside of them. So I agree, we should find, if there's a better way to get information from our community, that's great. But these, the interactions that people have with our schools, it's always higher in that group. It's always the English speakers and mostly the white speakers, or the white people. So honestly, I don't know what more you can do to expand that besides, like Kathy said, is there another way to do an evaluation? Call each parent one-on-one. But the reality is the engagement is what it is. And we need to figure out, the statistics tell us what our problems really are, who's learning and who's not learning.
I do think it's important to note that this was a kind of a quick pulse survey. When we have and when we've taken more time and we've had a lengthier runway with surveys or groups, we have conducted stakeholder groups within our FCRCs throughout the district. And I think when we have that time and we can reach out differently, as I've said, and we've been doing that, I think that we do get greater participation and we get a broader perspective. So I know that's something that we will continue to do. Obviously, the times make that a little challenging relative to getting to people. But I know, having sat through some of those forums over the last few years, there's just a great warmth to the participation and an interest on the part of the parents, and I think we get what we want then. And we'll continue to look at that. Are there any other questions, or I'll move on to Jim? And
I do, Mike. We've thrown the protocol of saving questions.
I know.
So I'm gonna jump in.
Hey, Wendy, I opened the door.
You did, and you knew who you were dealing with.
a lot of my questions I wrote down have already been asked. So, I mean, great minds think alike, I guess. I appreciate everybody asking their questions. But I just want to say that I'm the idea or the thought of our kindergartners in the buildings, I mean, it really does your heart good. I mean, I speak as a teacher who, you know, walks the hallways in my big empty high school, and it's just depressing because that's not how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be very energetic and full of life and full of, you know, those students. And I'm obviously very much missing that contact with my students. And I know that all of our teachers are feeling that way. So the idea of having students in the classroom, I'm envious. I was like, oh, I want that so bad too. So I'm so excited. You know, the very first day of the in-person kindergarten, I was driving to work, and there was the little kindergartner, one of my neighbors and their kindergarten son waiting for the bus. I'm gonna guess maybe the one bus rider. But they were. It was just. It was so obvious the excitement with him and his parents, and just driving past them, it made my heart feel good to think that these students are getting this opportunity at long last, especially for our kindergartners, because it's kindergarten, right? Like, it's the excitement for kindergartners is just so much greater than even other grade levels. So I love that, and I love hearing about it. I do want to express concerns, though, when we look at the responses from the teachers, and I know that this is a snapshot at the very beginning of this process. I mean, there really wasn't a lot of experience really to work with when we asked kind of for the initial impressions of how is this going. And I imagine we might even get different responses now, but we heard it in some of the comments that were done during citizens' comments. Board directors are certainly seeing it in some of the emails that we're getting. The concerns of our kindergarten teachers with regards to safety, and I would really like to see us dig into what those concerns are. We have these protocols in place. We've been very careful to create a plan to maximize safety for our students and our staff. And I'm really curious to hear what specific concerns they might have around safety. What can we do better? What can we do more? What is it that they need in order to help them feel safe? If they have some specific suggestions, that would be, I think, worth looking into. And then the other issue is, of course, workload, which was the concern that I expressed when we looked at this plan about a month ago, because it sounded really overwhelming to me just on paper, just listening to the description. And it seems like a lot of the feedback we're getting has to do with the workload of having to balance all these different groups. And so I would really also appreciate looking into that a little bit more, and frankly, just asking point blank, what do they need? What can we do to help them support them in this work, and make it more effective and for our students. The idea of our kindergartners, even in normal circumstances, go above and beyond. They're some of our hardest working teachers. And so I know if they say they're being stretched thin, they really are being stretched thin, because in normal, regular years, they stretch themselves thin and never complain about it. So
No, they usually do with such joy.
If they're telling us that they're struggling, then we really have to pay attention to that and do what we can to help them. I just wanted to express that before we move on to the next topic.
And I would like to second that, because in addition to, and I've said this before, and I apologize if I sound like a broken record, but I have several really good friends who are kindergarten teachers in this district at different schools, and they are loving seeing those kids. They were giddy the day before, but they are so tired and so exhausted because of having to also do the remote piece. And these teachers, kindergarten teachers, all teachers are special. Kindergarten teachers, as Wendy said, are among some of the most inventive teachers, hardworking, and they're not going to just do the 30 minutes a day. They're not going to just live stream and just hope that everybody catches on. They're going to do the extra work, and that's just not that's just not right. And it's not right for them, and it's also not right for their students, because then their students are not getting the best of them. They're getting the dregs, what's left behind by the end of the week. And I apologize, but I know I was very clear at the last board meeting when we talked about this, that I did not like the setup of the remote for the remote learners. But I felt that that was highly inequitable for those kids that for medical or other reasons had to go on remote. They were not getting the same education. Despite the fact that we have these amazing kindergarten teachers, they were not going to be getting the same education. And I was pretty clear that I expected that we would start working towards a solution for that. I know that we are in the very beginnings of this, but to hear from a parent that they've been told that there's no plan to move forward on that, that kind of broke my heart and also gave me pause. So I don't want to be accusatory, but there has to be something different. And I know that I am also a broken record on this, but I think that if we allow our teachers and our building admins and the people that are working in those communities to come up with the solutions, we'd be pretty impressed. And be flexible. Let them be flexible.
I appreciate that, Kathy. And as I shared, and I know Dr. Webb shared as well, that we're going to investigate additional solutions and do what we can to mitigate workload concerns, and we'll look at those questions. Wendy, okay?
Thank you, Mike. I think we're ready to move on to the next
Okay,
one.
all right. Yeah, somebody was waving a cursor around there. I think we're so yeah, I'm going to ask Jim to talk a little bit about the data analysis at the high school.
All right, thanks, Mike. Good evening, everyone. I don't have to tell you that remote learning is not working for a vast majority of our kids. To focus on the depth of our kids' struggle, here's some global data for VPS high school students. In an analysis of credit-bearing courses at the high schools, we found an increase in DNF rates for all students, particularly those furthest from educational justice. Globally, for instance, across all high schools in VPS, 36% of all grades at Q1 were DNFs, 36%. If you look at individual students, high school students with at least one F went from 31% last year to half, 49% basically, in 2020. As you can tell on the slide, our kids furthest from educational justice are struggling the most. DNF rates for emerging bilinguals nearly doubled from 34% in 2019 to 64% in 2020. What this means is 64% of all the grades received by these amazing students were D and/or Fs in the current grading period. If we look further at individual high school EL students with at least one F, they went from 52%, again, a huge number, to nearly 77% currently in 2020. DNF rates for students with IEPs went from 31% last year to 43% in 2020. Students impacted by homelessness went from 36% last year to 56% in 2020. When we review current DNF rate data by race and ethnicity, we find our Hawaiian Pacific Islander and Hispanic students are further impacted. Hawaiian Pacific Islander students went from 32% last year to 56% in the current year, grading period, excuse me. Hispanic students went from 28% in 2019 to 48% in 2020. Next slide, please. To highlight why we cannot afford to wait any longer, 40% of all students in the current senior class received an F on their first quarter progress report. This represents an 18% increase from the average the previous 3 years. To put this in perspective, a VPS graduating cohort across a district typically has 1,600 to 1,700 students. If an additional 1,800 students, knowing that we like Wendy said last time, we have a decrease at the semester, but if that pattern holds true of 18% increase, that translates to approximately 300 students more in danger of not graduating on time. We have approximately 4 weeks after the winter break to find interventions for all students, but specifically to our point today, those students furthest from educational justice, so they do not put their graduation at risk this spring. To be clear, ongoing tiered intensive interventions at the building level to date are not impactful to the students being brought into the building beginning January 7th. They're not engaging. These are the students not engaging for whatever reason in remote learning. These students simply need the schoolhouse to be successful. At the end of the day, the needs of our most impacted kids has to rule the day. Charlotte?
Oh, thanks, Jim. Good evening, everybody. I'm here to talk about the plan to help the students that Jim just outlined, as well as others. At our last board meeting, I talked to you about the characteristics of the students that we were looking for, but I think tonight those students have been talked about in many ways by our community, by our staff, by the people you see on the screen in front of you. So we are looking at bringing back those kids that are students with risk factors. The tentative start date for that is January 7th, with a staff start date of January 6th. Some general information about that program is the elementary program will follow the AB Kinder schedule, and each pod in the elementary program could has capacity to serve as many as 400 students. John, if you want to advance the slide, please. In the middle and high school, they're mostly going to be following the A and B pod schedule, but some of our smaller sites will have a more individual schedule. And each of those pods at the secondary level has a capacity to include approximately 200 students, 6 through 12. The K-12 staff will only be required to be on site when the students are present. For system readiness, we have worked long, tireless hours and had a lot of fun doing it, but we have built stakeholder engagement across our system. We've worked with principals K-12, we've worked with the transportation department, our nutrition services, student information system, our HR department, and our safety department to get these plans across the district to a level that we're ready to put forward. In my department in particular, my team has been working monthly and sometimes twice a month with certain categories of our teachers. That's the EL leads, the LAP teachers, and our elementary achievement coaches. So those folks have had an opportunity to provide input on our planning. Lastly, we opened up biweekly office hours, in particular for those staff members I just mentioned. And those office hours have been to answer any questions, and it could be about online learning, in-person learning. Mostly they focused on the in-person learning that we're planning. And I've been noticing in the last few sessions of those that the questions are getting quite small and really leading just to one question. And those teachers want to know, when are we starting this? Our plans are getting really firm and we are ready and excited to welcome students back. When are we starting? So that's been a real high point for us. So with that, I turn it back over to you, Mike.
So relative to the last 4 slides and what Jim or Charlotte, I know, and Daniel Bettis has been involved in this, and Janelle as well, are there questions relative to this, this information?
I have a question, Mike.
Yes.
It says that the elementary, okay, so I'm sorry, the first bullet point, elementary follow AB kinder pod. Each pod has a capacity to include approximately 400 students. Is that, maybe you said this and I missed it, is that system wide?
Yes, and I'll let, yes, that would be 400, yeah, because we're looking at smaller groups per certificated teacher. So that's 400 students in an A pod and 400 in a B pod.
Okay.
Across all of the elementary schools. And Charlotte's nodding, saying, yes, I have that right.
Do we have any estimation of how many students would be served at the secondary level?
Yes, Charlotte, you have that, right?
Yes, so the same thing, Wendy, across K-12, 6-12, it would be about 200 students per pod across all middle and high schools. So spread out into very small numbers per school, but yeah, about 200.
Okay, so that's kind of getting to my next question, which is per certificated staff, like in terms of how many kids would be together physically in the same room together, do we have a maximum? Like for kindergarten, we didn't go any higher than 10. Do we have a maximum for this?
So we're starting out with 4, and then when we say small group, we wouldn't go any higher than we would with kindergarten. Small group, we just need to start small, and then grow accordingly to meet the needs of kids and staff.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I have a question, of course. In the list of people that have been met with, there's a noticeable group missing, and I don't know if that's just an oversight on the visual or not, but I don't see counselors mentioned. Any?
Well, I would have to ask Daniel and Charlotte. I know that when they worked with principals, I know that principals are working with counselors. So to what degree they were in the same room or their feedback was there, I know that when we're looking at the needs of students and we're assessing who needs to be reached first, I certainly know at the middle school and high school level, and having had conversations with Jim, that the counselors have been part of that conversation. And I'm making an assumption, Charlotte, that they have been at the elementary.
Yes, they have been.
So the counselors have been involved in the discussions of the students going back. I assume so, but I also don't want to just let that be. I want to make sure that our counselors who work really hard, some of our middle school counselors just absolutely wow me. So I want to make sure that they've also been included in this preparation.
Yep.
Yes. Yes, and they have, and additionally, we are cognizant of population levels in the building. And for instance, if you look at a Skyview High School, which on any given year could have 5 to 6 counselors, there may not be a need on a daily basis for all 5 to 6, but ensuring there's a schedule in place that when the students are there, at least a counselor is there to support students in need.
Terrific, because they're going to need them. Thank you.
Agreed.
So I kind of have a more logistical question of how this works, bringing students in. We're distributing, let's say elementary, 400 across 20 schools. When these students come in, will they be working with a newly assigned classroom teacher, or is this a support person to help them work and navigate remote learning?
That's a great question. So this is designed for providing students access to their core instruction. So they will be working with a specialist teacher, an EL specialist, a lab specialist, an EAC, someone of that sort, to connect them to their classroom, because the kids we are looking at are not currently connecting to their classroom teacher. So that will be our first mode of support. And then Kyle, to follow it up, we will then also intersperse EL support and lab support for those students. But our first rung is to get them connected to their classrooms.
Okay. And then, so that's the same for middle and high school. So it will be a physical space for them to come and then connect to their core instruction. And then there will be kind of support wrapped around them.
You have that exactly right.
Okay.
I have a question
and when you said specialist teachers, we did get some feedback from educators in the last few weeks when this was potentially going to start November 30th. Does this include, your arts block teachers, okay.
No, oh, I'm sorry. I was just shaking that I understood your question. Sorry.
Okay, no, I'm just curious because we did get quite a bit of feedback from those specialist teachers, just that they would be reassigned to this support.
That would not include the FAB teachers. They'll maintain their schedule.
Okay, okay.
But it's the ELL teachers, the lab
categorical,
teachers, and the coaches.
Categorically funded, certificated folks, yes.
So I guess that's my question though, is if you have like, you know, take for example, a lap teacher who right now is serving students that, you know, qualify for lap reading support. They're serving, you know, however many students remotely. And if they're getting reassigned to basically support students to access their core instruction. So they're not providing that instruction, they're just supporting those kids. The kids that are getting LAP remotely basically won't be getting their services anymore. Is that my understanding?
No. Thanks for asking that, Tracy. So that was a common misconception when we first started this planning. So what we've done is at each school work with the principals and their staff to decide what is the best use of their time. It doesn't have to be an either or. Lots of people and lots of staffs are figuring out ways to do both, to combine groups, to reallocate, to move times. They're at the building level allowed to have that kind of flexibility to do what fits their building best, but we don't want to leave any of those kids behind that are already connecting.
Okay, perfect. Because that's what I was understanding it as, that some kids wouldn't get served because teachers were getting, you know, reassigned in their duties. And so I wanted to make sure we weren't leaving any kids behind.
Yeah, that was sort of the impression I got from multiple emails that we were getting as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that, I think, and probably you've communicated and things are more clear, but the feedback the board initially got was that it was kind of at the expense of the kids that will be working remotely. But as long as we have the resource capacity to continue supporting those students who don't qualify to come in the buildings, I mean, I think it's wonderful that we're providing this opportunity, but I don't like the either or. I want it to not be at the expense of any other students who need the support.
There have been many conversations with the principals to this endeavor.
Okay, well, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
Believe it or not for me.
Okay. Well, that concludes the presentation, and I know that we'll have more to follow up with next week on this topic as well, and perhaps a little more granular picture of the data that we've talked about as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you all.
Madam Chair, that's all for the superintendent report.
Okay, so we just have a couple more things left on the agenda. The next item on our agenda is the board nominating committee's report. And the nominating committee was Tracy and Kamara. I'm happy to say that my, I almost said sentence as board chair. My first board chair is
sorry, I know I laugh really loudly.
So I'm going to hand it over to Tracy and Kamara to share their recommendation from the nominating committee.
Go ahead, Tracy.
I think, Kamara, I think you were going to.
Was it me?
Share.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I think we wanted to nominate Kyle. Is that how we start? I'm sorry, we should have talked before this. Kyle for the president position. I don't know if she'll be accepting that nomination. I've not done this, you guys. So.
Okay. So Kamara, just go ahead and let us know what your recommendations are, and then I'll ask for a motion to approve the recommendations.
Okay, I'll just, okay, so we're Kyle for president and Tracy for vice president. Thank you.
Okay, and then I will ask for a motion to approve the committee's recommendation.
I'll motion to approve.
Thank you, Kathy. And a second?
Second.
After the committee
Second.
members?
Yeah, I have to second, but you could, yeah.
I have to.
Thank you, Kamara. Any discussion or questions for the committee?
I just want to say thank you to you, Wendy. Your service has been amazing. So thank you.
Wow, Wendy.
I'm more than happy to hand it off. All right, let's go ahead and move to the vote. Director Banfield.
I move to approve my recommendation.
All you have to do is, yeah, we're voting. So
okay, voting yes. So yes.
There you go.
I
Director
vote
Decker.
Yes.
Director Decker.
I wholeheartedly approve.
Director Sproul.
You're muted.
Yes.
Maybe
that was my apprehension.
I will also vote yes, so the motion approves. For a second there, Kyle, I thought you were backing out. I was like, no. So the motion passes. Thank you in advance to both Kyle and Tracy for your willingness to serve. I know the board does appreciate it. And then the final item on our agenda is a report from the directors who attended the WASDA conference. Anything that you care to share with the board?
When I brought this up, I did not realize we'd be at the 2.5 hour mark, so I will make this extremely fast. The WASDA conference is the school director state conference. It held the weekend before Thanksgiving. As everything else this year, it was done remotely. And compared to my experience last year, it took all of the experience of networking and learning from school directors across the state away, but they still put on a really great presentation. I did most of the programming on the equity track, just given the priorities of our district, and then also a bunch of sessions just looking legislative priorities and budget outlook. I think everything we talked about tonight, there are hundreds of other conversations going on all over the state, and we're all feeling very similar pressures. I learned a lot. There were some really, really dynamic presenters, and the one benefit to a Zoom conference is we have access for several months to go back and rewatch or watch the presentations. So that's, I guess, the silver lining to a Zoom conference, but I will leave it there. I know Kamara and I were texting during it, just different sessions that we found beneficial or insightful.
Yeah, it was amazing. I feel like I was empowered and energized and felt like I got a lot of direction. The breakout groups were amazing. That we didn't get to do the same kind of socialization as we would have, but it was really nice to meet the directors from even our county were there. So that was pretty amazing. And I just feel like I learned a lot, ready to use it moving forward. And I think it was a really good conference.
Just wait till next year when you actually get to go in person and,
Let's only hope.
Yeah.
Don't jinx us.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to all the staff for your patience and your willingness to entertain our questions. And thank you, Dr. Webb, for all of your efforts as well. Everybody have a good night. Our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.